Okay. All right. So this is a presentation entitled History of Transgender and Intersex Individuals Through Time and Space. Yes, there is space in this presentation, I promise. We'll get to the space part. It's really fun. So, hi, I already introduced myself. I'm Anthony Redgrave. I am the co-founder of the Transgender Task Force and Redgrave Research Forensic Services. I am an instructional designer and online educator, a forensic genetic genealogist, and a doctoral student at the University of New England in transformative leadership and education. And I'm from Baltimore. I live in Massachusetts with my spouse and my teenager, and I am trans and intersex. I use he, him pronouns, and that's me in as quickly as I can give you, so I have plenty of time for the fun part. So, we have already discussed quite a bit about the Transgender Task Force in session 1. You can go back and watch that recording later if you want to. Please go check out our social media and our website over the next couple of days, as we'll be posting replays of all of these sessions and answering some of your questions that we don't get to today. And we have some other things there, like collaboration we did with the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit is on there. That's really cool. We've got previous presentations from scientific conventions, and you can go check that all out. And we will definitely keep dropping you other fun stuff to look at. So we already gave you this recap in the first slide, so I don't have to read it again. So let's go over a little bit of definitions. If you have the PDF packet that's on the website or in the Facebook event, you can get a link to our glossary, which has a lot more than just this on it, but these are the terms that we're going to use for today. So for the sake of keeping everything simple so that nobody has to argue semantics or wonder what I'm talking about, sex and gender, two different things. Sex is male, female, or intersex division of a species, especially as differentiated with reference to the reproductive functions. So that's the parts of your body and your chromosomes and everything determines your sex. Your gender is either the male or female division of the species, especially as differentiated by social and cultural roles and behavior, or a similar category of human beings that is outside of the male-female binary classification and is based on the individual's personal awareness or identity. So gender is something that you either have assigned to you based on your assigned sex and you're fine with it. That would make you a cisgender person, a person who's comfortable with their sex and gender being the same thing. Or you could be a transgender person, which is the next thing here, noting or relating to a person whose gender identity does not correspond to that person's assigned sex at birth.
I would interject and qualify dictionary.com and say that gender might be more accularly represented in words like masculine and feminine.
Exactly. I'm going to change that on this slide next time.
So, sex is male or female if you're talking about binary, and gender, if you're talking about binary, would be masculine, feminine. Mm-hmm. It's interesting how fast language evolves and how it changes, and this is dictionary definition even, so.
Mm-hmm. An intersex is noting or relating to a person, animal, or plant having male and female reproductive organs, or in which a chromosomal pattern does not fall under typical definitions of male and female. So let's talk a little bit more about what intersex means, because it is not very well understood. So we're going to go through a little bit more about this, and you'll find out that it's not actually that uncommon. Whew. I'm going to breathe now. I do this too fast every time. All right. So I need to move my little head out of the way. There we go. So there are at least 47 different intersex variations, both visible and invisible. Some are chromosomal and some are not, and some are known to the intersex person, and some intersex people have no idea that they're intersex. There are so many different factors that contribute to determining sex that it boggles the mind to think that anyone could think there were only two. Look at all these different things here: chromosomes, genes, hormones, hormone receptors, internal sex organs, external sex organs, and secondary sex characteristics all feed into what defines a person's status as to their biological sex. There are 47 variations at least, probably more. So there's been a number of attempts to get a percentage of the human population that is in some way intersex. That number is somewhere between 1% and 2%. That's exactly the same percentage of people who are estimated to be redheads. So the odds are pretty good that if you've ever met a redheaded person before, you've probably met an intersex person and you probably didn't know it. Or they didn't even know it either. That's also possible. Clicker, go. Okay, good. It's just the same slide. Here's the problem with statistics, though. You have to define the term intersex. And as we talked about earlier, it's difficult to get people to agree on language. You'd have to make a determination on what exactly is ambiguous enough to be considered intersex. Just like if you're trying to determine a percentage of redheads, just how red are we talking here? Do strawberry blondes count? Auburn, like black with a red highlight? Like really, what does redhead mean? There's a lot of variation there as well. The trouble with defining something also is that the context colors the way you categorize something. So let's take a look at some examples. Here, we have two fine examples of men's fashion in France. So some of you probably don't agree with me here, but these are both really manly men. They're both pinnacles of masculinity of their time. If you were viewing both of these examples from the perspective of the 21st century, you might not think so, but we're going to get to the context. High-heeled shoes were once a masculine gendered clothing item because they actually served a purpose. In serving a function, keeping shoes inside of stirrups while you're on a horse, they also indicate a societal station. A wealthy man would have high heels because he would be on a horse, which he would be able to afford. A poor man would be not likely to have high heels, as they would be impractical if he did not have a horse. Therefore, form and function work synergistically in this example to equate high heels with a wealthy male identity. And also of note, this also means that in order to be the pinnacle of masculinity in this society, you would have to have a lot of money. So that's another societal structure there too. There are more complicated examples of the use and misuse of context, and it will get multi-layered when we start looking at biblical texts. So in the King James translation of the Bible, we're going to take a look at the word servant. It's one word in English, but it's used in place of at least two. The word servant is, in this context, used to describe someone born into slavery. This is in one of several stories in which Jesus heals someone's servant. In this case, it's someone who is a born slave or bondman. In another instance of the word servant, we see that Jesus is being asked to heal the servant of a Roman centurion. He says, yes, no question, a servant's a servant, right? He says, Lord, my servant lieth sick at home. And Jesus says, I will come unto him and I will heal him. So this version of the word servant in the original Greek is a completely different word with more than one meaning based on how you use it. So since we're talking about a centurion, he doesn't have any children, but what he probably does have is a same-sex partner that he probably had to purchase, which was the norm at the time. So we can suppose that this kind of servant is a different kind of servant than the other one, but that's okay because Jesus healed him anyway. There are some who will say that this particular translation of servant in this instant should be referred to as beloved servant, and I like that better. I just wanted to throw that out there. You can look this up. You should Google it. There's a really cool TED Talk about it. I will probably add it in my notes later. The word eunuch, also in the King James Version of the Bible, has a number of different meanings. So it's actually a catch-all for anybody who might be gender variant. In this instance, we can see that what we view the definition of eunuch to be, a castrated man, is actually more complicated. Eunuchs born from their mother's womb could easily imply or include intersex people. So there were, for For there were some eunuchs who were so born from their mother's womb, and there were some eunuchs that were made eunuchs of men. That's the kind that you typically think of. And there be eunuchs which have been made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So that, I like that line there. I think that kind of implies that all of this is totally okay. No problem. So in Norse society, Old Norse society had a code of conduct that dictated that you could actually kill someone if they called you effeminate or unmasculine. Specifically, if they called you a man who took the passive role in sex. On one hand, you might expect this if you consider the pop culture image of a Viking. In the context of Old Norse stories and beliefs, though, there's a lot more gender play going on. For example, there was that one time when Loki turned into a female horse and gave birth to another horse. Or that time that Thor disguised himself as a woman at the wedding party and all the guests were like, wow, that lady sure eats a lot. So there's a lot going on there. We're going to talk about this slide for a minute. So there's a word here that's being used called ergi, and that is a word that is often used as a slur, which is willing or inclined to play or interested in playing the female part in sexual relations with another man. However, it's also very powerful for a different reason. So, Odin, this is fun. The underlying subtext here is that in Norse beliefs, there is a power in gender variance. This is repeated in many other cultures, but a good example is a story in which Odin seeks out Freya to teach him what is generally starkly gendered women's magic. And she teaches him, but he has to wear skirts for a year. So that goes to show you that even if the Allfather thinks it's worth being called ergi so he can learn women's magic, it must be really, really, really worth it. One of Odin's many names is Jalkr, which is sometimes translated as gelding, but that actually means eunuch. He is one of the best known male figures in Norse writing to practice women's magic, but there are others too. So there's a archaeological gravesite in Sweden that is hotly debated. Even though it was excavated at the end of the 19th century, it makes sense to assume that an archaeologist at this time would have observer bias and declare a gravesite of this nature to be a male warrior. It was excavated with horses, weapons, other items commonly associated with a warrior's burial. So in 2017, the remains underwent an anthropological analysis and were determined to be female. So what doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me is that in recent arguments upon discovering that the burial is for an assigned female, there's an attempt to dissuade people from thinking that those swords and axes were really hers. Old Norse society was much more flexible in giving women space to take on traditionally masculine occupations, just not usually the other way around. Here's a couple more examples of cultures that have had specific places for gender variant individuals. Some of these are a mixed bag. For example, in India, the Hijra are feared and reviled and somehow at the same time considered divine. The Native American concept of two-spirit is an umbrella term for people who fall outside of the gender binary who have their own special place in society. There is a degree of shamanism in Borneo that is considered third gender by way of sort of a ritual hazing and cross-dressing. It's not just cross-dressing, it's cross-dressing and being basically ritually attacked and ridiculed. And it's sort of a symbolic death that leads to a third gender status. And then in Italy, there is a society of people who are non-binary, as far as I know, mostly masculine non-binary people who are somehow lucky and they have their own festival and it's really pretty and you should Google it. It's really fun.
Remember what it's called?
They are the Feminello. I'm not good at Italian.
Feminello?
Feminello, yes. They're cool. So we've gone over some of the broad topics to give some historical, cultural, and spiritual context that you might not have heard before. So let's meet some individuals throughout time that you might not have heard of. I do have a long time, so I can talk about these a lot. I am gonna just check the chat really quick to make sure nobody needs me for anything since I'm going real fast. Yeah, just talking. Okay. All right, we're gonna have some questions to answer afterwards. Okay, so we have a couple of historical examples here that are going to be really fun, and I kind of have them in chronological order, but not exactly. And also, please forgive me if I butcher any translations. I'm not good at Greek. I'm not good at Italian, but I am good at telling you some really cool stuff about some really cool people from history. So let's do that. No, go to my next slide. Go. There we go. Go. Oh, my clicker stopped working. I guess I'll advance it manually. There we go. So Favorinus or Favorinus was an early Greek philosopher who, his works aren't very well preserved, but what other people have to say about him was. Analysis of his description seems to indicate that he was intersex and possibly had androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is a very common form of intersex condition. He was referred to as a eunuch by birth. So if you remember the Bible quote from earlier, this is another example of the word eunuch being used in ways you may not expect. He was described as being born without testicles, having a high voice and no beard. He was a skeptic philosopher, an academic skeptic philosopher. The basis of academic skepticism is basically that it's impossible to know anything. So he's fun. You know, most of the stuff that you look at about Greek philosophers has a lot to do with arguing points. His argument was against everybody because he was basically like, no, you don't know anything. So he's fun. Moving on, we have the Chevalier d'Eon. The Chevalier d'Eon was a member of the French military and was very well regarded during their lifetime. There's plenty of room to speculate on whether their motivations for petitioning the French court to allow her to present as female, like where that motivation came from. But it's also possible that her experience masquerading as female to infiltrate the Russian court may have stirred something up. This is not an uncommon occurrence. If you listen to narratives of military veterans who have transitioned, it's sometimes stuff like that just happens, and it's not an uncommon occurrence. So this is somebody who was a very skilled infiltrator, mimic, master of disguise, infiltrated the Russian court dressed as a woman, supposedly served as the empress's handmaiden in disguise the entire time. So in 1777, d'Eon claimed to have been assigned female at birth, but was raised as a boy to ensure inheritance. But upon her death in 1810, the physicians declared that she was male organs in every respect perfectly formed, but also feminine characteristics. So her petition to the French court was so convincing that Louis XIV gave her a stipend to purchase new clothes. That's pretty badass. So good for her. So here's one of my favorites. They're all my favorites, but the public universal friend. This is the first spiritual movement in the Americas that was started by an American-born person, was also a non-binary person. The public universal friend was assigned female at birth, and in 1776 was bedridden with a fever for several days. And when the fever broke, they woke up, declared that their previous soul had ascended to heaven. Their body had been animated by a new genderless spirit sent from God named the public universal friend. They adopted androgynous clothing and refused to answer to their former name or gendered pronouns, and maintained this throughout the rest of their life. And their followers respected that, and the movement did eventually die out, but it did gain quite a foothold for a while. The Friends' parents were Quakers, so that was the basis of a lot of the beliefs.
That one's one of your favorites because that one's your cousin.
That one is my cousin. That one is my 5th cousin, 9 times removed. I just needed to throw that in there because genealogist. Albert Casher is a figure from the American Civil War who was assigned female at birth, enlisted in the Union Army in 1862. I made a typo. It says 1682. It should say 1862, under the name Albert Casher. And Albert continued to live as a man after the war, received a soldier's pension. He was injured in a car accident in 1911. The surgeon treating his broken leg discovered his assigned sex but did not disclose it. He was hospitalized in the Soldiers and Sailors Home in 1914 and lived there as male and maintained that. And when he was moved to an asylum from showing signs of elderly dementia, that's when his assigned sex was discovered again. The attendants forced him to wear female attire. And in spite of his deteriorating mental faculties, he was known to pin up his skirts to make makeshift pants. So this is somebody who had a very strong masculine identity. His fellow veterans ensured that he continued to receive his pension payments for the rest of his life, in spite of all of this. He served in the war. They considered him a brother. And he's really a very powerful figure for trans people. Occasionally, his story is used as an example of feminism, but that is not what is going on here clearly. This is someone with a strong transmasculine identity, standing up for his identity in a time when that was completely unheard of. Alan Hart is someone who is all but forgotten today, and he probably prefers it that way. He was permitted by his grandparents to present as male while in their care from ages 5 to 12. When he went back to live with his parents, and also when he attended medical school, he was issued a doctorate under his dead name, the name he was assigned at birth and did not use, and that limited his ability to seek employment. He was also possibly the earliest trans man to undergo a hysterectomy surgery in 1917. He legally changed his name and gender and married a woman, began hormone therapy in 1920 as soon as synthetic hormones became available. Being a member of the medical field, he was able to access that as soon as possible. He devoted his medical career to tuberculosis research. That was what he cared about the most. And he requested that all of his personal communications and photographs be destroyed upon his death. Now, this is what we call a stealth trans man. This is someone who was determined to maintain their male identity and not reveal their trans male identity. He worked as hard as possible during a time when he had to assert his identity constantly because his former classmates were outing him accidentally left and right. I almost feel bad about putting this slide in here because he did not want to be out, but I need you to know that just because a person is trans does not mean they have to work in trans activism or trans health. They can do whatever they want. It does not have to be the only thing that defines you. Christine Jorgensen. A lot of people already know about Christine Jorgensen if you're already familiar with the United States LGBT history. She's one of the earliest American recipients of gender confirmation surgeries that was misreported in the news when the news broke. She was called the first one, but she wasn't the first one. She made the front page of the New York Daily News in 1952 with the headline, "XGI becomes blonde beauty." She was a veteran and she was well respected among those that she served with and transitioned. The article does incorrectly notify that she is the first recipient of what was then called sex change surgery. We do not call it that now. It is gender affirmation surgery. Or gender confirmation surgery. So she was very charismatic, very well-spoken, very intelligent. Her instant celebrity allowed her to be an advocate for transgender people. She was the face. She was our earliest face that we had really for being visible and being respected, because people were amazed that, oh wait, there's a trans woman and she's smart and pretty and successful. because that's actually possible. And so fictional portrayal of trans and intersex people can get really ugly. And we're going to get into some positive examples of that now, but I wanted to lead into that with Christine Jorgensen because she was an actress and a musician. So this leads into the media discussion well. So media visibility. We have been seeing more and more examples of trans and non-binary people showing up in serial media and television, and even kids shows now, which is really great. But there have been examples of this for a very long time. We're going to go over a couple of really good ones. Some of them you'll know, and some of them you won't. You should all know about Mulan. The point of Mulan's story is not that Mulan wants to be a man. The point of Mulan's story is that she wants to get the job done, and she has something that she feels she owes to her country and to her family. The context in which the story takes place changes according to the era in which it is told. It's more about national pride and military history than it is about gender visibility. However, some adaptations of her story have had that spin on them because they've been more modern. For example, there's a novel in 1695 where she commits suicide in order to avoid being raped in the end of the story. The 1998 Disney film adaptation has a lot to do with self-identification, but then leads into a story of binary gender equity, where she's fine with being a female identified person after her hero's journey. And that's great, but you'll see that you might consider her to be a sort of a trans icon, but she's not exactly, but it's definitely interesting to look at. Here's my absolute favorite example of a trans person in a TV show ever, Denise Bryson of Twin Peaks, portrayed by David Duchovny in 1990 to 1991. Denise Bryson was a DEA agent who transitioned on the job after going undercover in female clothing and found that she felt more comfortable. So if you remember the story of Chevalier Dayon earlier, it kind of mirrors that. Kind of makes me wonder if Stephen Lynch read about her. David Lynch probably read about her. So in season 3, which happened 25 years later, which you'll get the reference if you've seen it, she was promoted to the FBI chief of staff with the support of many of her coworkers. Now, again, if you know anything about Twin Peaks, you'll realize that there's a lot of things that are fantastical in the story, but this is the one that I had to suspend my disbelief the most for, unfortunately, but it was very nice to see. She's possibly the earliest portrayal of a trans woman as a recurring character in a TV show, and hardly anyone noticed, probably because it wasn't a big deal to the story, which was great, which is the way it should be, because trans people are people.
She wasn't a scandalous character.
She wasn't scandalous. She was respectable. Joan Lambert. This one's fun. This is the part where we get to the space part of the presentation, which I promised you. So in the original Alien, there's a character named Joan Lambert. She's the last character to survive to the end other than Ellen Ripley. She's the one who makes it to the end with her, and she's the last one to die. Sorry about the spoilers, but go watch Alien. She appears initially as a somewhat nervous, reactionary, but otherwise ordinary female character. And everything seems perfectly normal. You know, it's an action movie in space, and it's very good with the positive female role model portrayal. So in Alien 2 Aliens in 1986, Ripley is given a briefing about the events of the previous movie. Dossiers of the deceased crew members scroll through screens in the background. You can't really read them unless you pause or if you have the special edition DVD. But let's take a look at what Jones says. It says, subject is Despin convert at birth, male to female. So what does that mean? So far, no indication of suppressed trauma related to gender alteration. So what's your first impression about this? Just think about it to yourself for a minute. Like, What is a despin convert at birth? We have no context for what that actually means because this is a fictional story set in the future. Could this be the name of a surgeon? Could this be the name of a religious movement? Could it be the name of a procedure? So what other explanations could you think of other than your first impression if you consider that this film takes place in 2122 and not 2021? So the lack of further context for the meaning of despin convert at birth in the alien universe, how does that compare to our lack of context for seeming gender variance in earlier civilizations? There is a lot of information that has been lost from the past. And if we apply our modern day cultural lens to it, we might infer things that are not accurate. For example, like when we talked about the example of Mulan, her story isn't about gender variance, it's about military pride. And for example, the concept of being a two-spirit, or the concept of being a shaman who's third gender, like how much does it actually matter? Like, does the identity of your gender actually matter, or is it a device by which you get something else done? So we have a lot to think about here. And it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at historical examples and even modern examples from other cultures. If you apply your perspective from your current time and place, you might be inferring a observer bias. And we're going to talk about observer bias later as well. So we've shown some examples of how we are visible in the media, but now we're going to talk about some ways in which we have been made invisible. The truth is that people tend to avoid or fear things that they don't understand. And by not understanding trans and intersex issues, that makes us susceptible to a lot of violence, a lot of hate-related violence, and a lot of villainization. So given all that, we're going to take a look at some hard to look at stuff here that, just bear with me, it's not pretty, but you need to know about it. And this is why the Transgender Task Force exists, to combat this kind of stuff. And by giving you knowledge and spreading this knowledge, we can combat a lot of this fear and a lot of this hate. Culturally accepted intersex infanticide. This is a not uncommon occurrence. It's continuing to go on throughout the entire world. It's known to be a major problem in South and East Africa, South Asia, Brazil, and China. In some places in Africa, an intersex child is considered to be a bad omen. Accurate numbers will never be known as to how many times this has actually occurred, as mothers are often told that their children are stillborn after the home birth attendant kills the infant. So there is a, one of these articles is linked here, I think, but there is a birth attendant in Africa who contested this and started adopting the intersex children and claiming that she killed them. And she has a whole bunch of adopted kids now. And there are some really amazing articles about her, and I'll make sure that y'all get that link too. But there are people trying to combat this in the region who are native to the area. And it just takes, one person at a time. The Nazi destruction of LGBT+ Medical Research and Treatment Center. Magnus Hirschfeld was a German sexologist and advocate for sexual minorities. He was actually the person who coined the term transsexualism, which is now outdated as we know, but he was the first person to actually use that, and worked alongside Dr. Harry Benjamin. If you know about Dr. Harry Benjamin, he was an early clinical sexologist who created the original standards of care for transgender people to actually medically transition. So for context, we talked about Julie Doe in the first presentation. Her process of transition was almost definitely according to Harry Benjamin's standards of care, which include things like living full-time as your chosen identity, as your gender identity that you affirm for up to a year, and also moving away from everyone that you know and starting a new life. They don't make you do that anymore. They don't even make you do a whole lot of the Harry Benjamin stuff anymore now that we've switched to a more informed consent model in most places. But this was the first attempt at actually outlining what was needed to actually help people to achieve their goal of gender transition. And so these people worked together to actually create that. So his practice, Magnus Hirschfeld, he performed some of the earliest successful gender affirming surgeries in the 1930s. This predates Christine Jorgensen, but nobody talked about these people because they were in Germany, they weren't in the US. And they probably just wanted to fly under the radar and go about their business. His private research institute was destroyed by the Nazi Party in 1933, and all of his research was burned. What does remain is available at his website here. You can go look at his digital archives and learn more about the history of his practice and the people who he affected, some case studies. It's really heartening to see, and it's the loss of all of his research put us back decades and continues to hurt us now. The John Joan case. This is the hardest one for me to talk about. So in 1965, there were identical twin brothers, Bruce and Brian Reimer. Bruce's genitals were irreversibly damaged during a circumcision as an infant, and Bruce was given surgical and hormonal intervention and raised as a girl named Brenda. The doctor responsible routinely lied about the success of this treatment after every evaluation, had the twins simulate sexual acts with each other for supposedly healthy development of sexual identity. Brian ended up developing schizophrenia during his adolescence from this experience. At age 13, Brenda was told the truth and transitioned socially and medically back to male and took the name David. Eventually, both twins actually took their lives, Brian first and then David. So the doctor who did this lied in his reports, lied in his academic papers, said that he could make a girl out of a circumcised boy somehow. And this has been the basis for a lot of really hurtful medical practices since then. This doctor was Dr. John Money. Dr. John Money was a sexologist specializing in sexual identity and biology of gender. He held the belief that gender was learned rather than innate. Now, I think we know by now that that is not true, but his fabricated findings are the basis for infant surgical interventions for children born with ambiguous or abnormal genitalia. So there are routine surgeries done to children born intersex to normalize what they look like and try to give them a normal life. But how do you know what's normal for a child if you can't ask them yet what their preferred pronouns are, what their gender is, because they're too young? Despite clear evidence that his research was fabricated, many medical doctors still adhere to his methodology and his theories. And his research is also the basis for a large part of transgender healthcare as it is now, even though it is well known to be false. For context, my trans-related medical care in 2004 was through a clinical sexologist who now has Dr. John Money's old job at Johns Hopkins. So my letter for recommendation for hormone treatment actually starts with Dear John. And
it's not so ancient history.
Not so ancient history. That was 2004, 2 years before he died. Also, people don't need to see clinical sexologists anymore, which is great. So we're getting farther away from that, thank goodness, but still not far enough away. This is an important slide to include. Why is there no Black representation in this slide deck? That's a complicated question. Western medicine has a history of being inherently racist due to pre-Civil War era medical studies, because of the insistence that Black people were an entirely different species. There are a number of very biased medical studies that have made it so that some life-saving medical equipment is still race-corrected. For example, there are some oxygen supplying machinery that is corrected to adjust the amount of oxygen intake, because there was a study done during the Civil War that implied that slavery was good for Black people because of their lungs and needing to get more oxygen by working hard. That's a load of crap. In far too recent history, Black people have been the subject of involuntary medical experimentation, such as the Tuskegee Airmen. I have a lot more time to fill, so we can take a lot of questions. We can keep talking, which is great because I love this topic. So there, you know about the study of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. There are a number of African-American military enlistees who were involuntarily medically experimented on. And this, unfortunately, is not far enough into the past. Gender neutral language was also used to dehumanize enslaved people. So this is one reason why you might not see a lot of use of gender neutral language or trans inclusive language historically for enslaved Black people, because they were actually referred to using gender neutral pronouns on purpose for negative reasons. This makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to find historical examples of Black transgender and intersex people, despite Black trans women being at the forefront of the trans rights movement. Let's meet Martha P. Johnson. According to Marsha, the P stands for pay it no mind in regards to her gender. She was at the forefront of the Stonewall Uprising in 1969. There are a number of really fantastic stories about things that she did and things that she said. She's, a legend in her own right. She's still a contemporary historical figure, but is still remembered in life by many, but she's an icon. And she's the earliest and best example I could find and continue to find of a Black trans woman. And I wanted to share her with you and remember that she had all of you in mind when she fought for you. So the future holds some really great things, I think. These are just some things that have happened in the past, little over a decade. In 2015, Malta, of all places, became the first country to outlaw non-consensual medical modifications to sexual anatomy. They have completely stopped doing non-essential, non-consensual genital surgeries on infants and anyone. In 2017, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch both published reports on the rights of intersex children in Colombia. Parents and doctors of, I strung two things here. So the 2017 reports on the rights of intersex children happened by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They're really good reports. You can look them up. In Colombia, parents and doctors of intersex children are restricted from making medical sexual anatomy modifications on children until age 5, by which point the child may have the opportunity to realize their own gender identity. Now, this is really exciting, but also still really problematic, because if you consider the fact that, a 5-year-old is able to say what they want. So if a 5-year-old says, hey, I'm a boy, they're going to mean that, because if you check enough times and you make sure that they're not just playing with you, if that continues, you've got a trans kid. But the issue here is that if there's a parent who really staunchly wants their child to have this anatomy modification, it's easy to sway a 5-year-old. So it's kind of a gray area. 5 is pretty good, but 10 would be better. Anytime before puberty hits would be better, but 5 is maybe a little young, because then you can still, and
bodily autonomy is important.
Bodily autonomy is very important. Sexual anatomy modifications are also prohibited in Madras, except in life-threatening situations. So you can see all these places here are not the United States. There are state and county specific legislations and policies coming into place to ban sexual anatomy modification on intersex children, but they're not coming fast enough. They're not at a federal level, and hopefully we're going to get there soon. So that is my presentation. I still have a lot of time left.
That's good. There's a lot of questions.
So we can ask some questions. I have not that very many in the Q&A here. Are they all coming in through the YouTube or?
No, there was a lot of questions from the previous one hanging over.
Okay, so
I don't know where those are now.
We can take care of that. If anybody has any questions about this presentation, you can put them in the Q&A section on the Zoom, or you can put them in the chat on YouTube, and I will be able to get to them. And I'm just going to start answering some questions. So I'm going to start with the ones that were left over from the last session, because that will be a little easier to catch up on while you guys add more questions in for me. So, is there a gender neutral Jane or John Doe equivalent for use in these cases? Just calling them does feels slightly impersonal and dehumanizing. We tend to go with just trans doe. Honestly, we don't mind going with just doe. It's better than unidentified decedent. Lee, do you have any input on that one?
I've tried to think of like an alternate name to suggest like some gender neutral J name or something, but that might just confuse people. I think it might just confuse people. That saying trans doe at least lets them know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then if you're talking about an individual case, just refer to the case by whatever you're calling the case.
When we're working on cases ourselves under Redgrave Research, we'll give them a nickname. We won't just call them Jane or John Doe or by like their county and their year. We'll give them a name that we'll use for now, and we do that in order to actually humanize them more and make it easier for us to talk about. But overall, we do generally stick to just trans doe because that just makes it a little easier. Even that's not inclusive enough, because what if they're not trans? But we are trying to figure that out, and we will take suggestions. Something will stick eventually.
Yeah, honestly, most of our cases, if we reach an ID on most of the cases we're researching, they probably won't have an actually trans identity. They'll have some variant identity of some kind, or not. Maybe they have a cisgender identity and just have a different fashion sense. And the thing that matters is that their case may have fallen through a crack in the system because of the way that it was viewed at the time. So we rule in rather than ruling out cases. And people say, how do you know if a case is a trans case? Well, we don't.
We don't know until they're identified.
We have to rule it in if it's possible. If it's even possible, we're going to take a second look.
Sorry, I'm drinking a drink.
No, I put it there.
Okay. All right. So what has been the most rewarding case or aspect of this nonprofit? The most rewarding case is absolutely Pillar Point. Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we can't talk about, but what I can tell you is that getting to the point where we knew their name, at least their dead name, and we knew who they were and where they came from.
And seeing
a photo, because we had to deal with the postmortems, and they were devastating, and that is something that will stay with me forever.
There's a reason they're not public.
There is a very good reason they are not public, and being able to, we found one photo, and it wasn't a photo of them like presenting as female. It was well before anything ever happened.
It was a yearbook photo.
So, but just being able to see them alive in any state, like, that was rewarding for us. And also
it's healing.
It's absolutely healing. And we were able to share that healing with the community as well. When you see that come to a resolution, and when you see that you can't erase people from existence, and you can absolutely show that everyone matters, that's what we're here for. Everyone absolutely matters, whether they're a trans person or an intersex person who went unidentified for whatever reason, or if they're a cisgendered person who is misclassified and also deserves just as much of a chance of getting identified. Everyone deserves that chance, and that's something that we will always feel is rewarding and important. Do you see examples where different law enforcement databases are updating their sex assignment options? Which agencies are the leaders in this? I don't know an agency-specific case-by-case agency basis, but I can tell you that the NamUs database about a year ago, a little over a year ago, added unknown or other to their to their missing persons side, they had unknown in the unidentified side before. And we haven't seen very many people start to use this, but a few have, and it's certainly better than nothing. It's a vast improvement because, you know, these people in the other category can get compared to either male or female. So that's really good. We'd love to see more databases get updated in this way.
It's kind of a tangent off of this question, but something that's interesting to mention is that we've been seeing a lot of cases that we're looking at where whoever's in charge, you know, somebody new will come on and somebody new takes the case on, and they go in and they edit and update the NamUs profile and correct some of the you know, some of the negative language or
we've seen that happen a few times.
Inappropriate terms and things. So some people are starting to do that, and that's really good to see.
In dealing with various professions to obtain information or assistance, do you seek out those professionals who are part of the LGBTQ plus community? We would love to. There's actually not a whole lot of people in criminal justice or anthropology who are out yet. We're seeing that more and more. We're seeing more people feel encouraged to be honest and upfront about their identity.
Just people feeling safe to come out because they see other people doing it.
They see us doing it. Honestly, I'm going to give a shout out to Sean Tallman here.
Oh yeah.
He is a hero and is an excellent example of somebody who
encourages a supportive environment for diversity.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So also important to mention, like if we're reaching out to a like a police department, we will absolutely look up to see if that department has an LGBTQ liaison officer, and we'll reach out to them first.
You're welcome, Sean.
So yeah, we definitely do try to seek out people who are, you know, waving the flag saying, we're here, we're friendly, come talk to us. And we seek those people out first. If we can't find them, we're not shy about approaching people even people we know are going to be, you know, not necessarily LGBTQ supportive. We still can reach out to them on a human level and say, look, there's an unidentified decedent in your district or in your jurisdiction. And we can help you. We're here with a solution to help you understand things that might not be easy to understand. So it's important to look for the waving flags first. Yeah. But we also aren't shy about talking to people who are totally unfamiliar with anything we're talking about.
We'll catch them up. It'll be fine. So, how many mistranslations or various definitions in the Bible contribute to the misunderstanding of sex, gender, and sexuality? That is very hard to quantify because there are so many different translations of the Bible. The King James translation of the Bible is still considered to be the standard and the best one, but obviously it's hundreds of years old. In order to really know that, you would have to be a Bible scholar and a linguist, which I am not. I know a little more than the average person, but there is quite a lot of that. Those two examples that I gave are the big ones. But what's really important is if you really have a question, seek out a biblical scholar. There's plenty of them around who are also queer. I would like to give a shout out to there's a student at the Harvard Divinity School who actually does a podcast covering using the Harry Potter books. This predates the J.K. Rowling fiasco, called Harry Potter and the Sacred Texts. And he is a very good person to talk to about biblical topics in relation to in relation to queer topics. In relation to COVID relief or for gender studies in Pakistan, is the information we are being provided today part of that picture? Is Pakistan a hotspot for trans violence and a misunderstanding of genetic science? If you go and look at the Trans Day of Remembrance website, tdor.info, you can actually sort by country, and you can actually see there are a number of India and Pakistani entries that are actually medical related deaths related to COVID of people not getting care. I don't have that in front of me right now, but you can look at that and you can get that data, and it might be very interesting to you. So you should go there and take a look at some analytics.
Yeah.
When referring to a victim in writing who is trans, is it appropriate to refer to them as trans, or should you refer to them as their preferred gender pronoun? What should you do if you're not sure? Okay, that's a little bit of a complicated question, but not really. So if a person is out as trans, it is okay to refer to them as trans. If a person's trans status will help in their identification or the solving of their homicide, it's absolutely appropriate to refer to them as that, with the use also of their preferred pronouns. If you do not know their preferred pronouns or their gender or their gender status, you stick to gender neutral pronouns. Say they, say you don't know, and that's fine.
And say the reasons you don't know, or the reasons why you're using whatever you're using. If you're making an assumption, state why you're making that assumption. And if you don't have anything to go on, state that too.
Yeah, so that's the basic guide. And if you have any questions, and if you have any writing that you'd like us to look over, please email us. We will take a look at it and help you with language. I much prefer people coming to us with all their problems and us being able to answer them than making your best guess, which, your best guess, if you're doing it from the right place, is sometimes really good. But if you really, really, really want to make sure that you're being as sensitive and respectful as possible, come to us and we'll do our best.
You know what? There's that... There's a style guide.
There's a style guide.
There's a writer who made a really, really good style guide. We could grab the link for that. If you want to email us and just remind us about the style guide, or we can provide it as a resource.
We'll add it to the page.
Or you can just Google transgender writing style guide. It'll probably pop up. The most important thing that I can tell you as somebody who has been working in this community for a long time, no matter what you say, there will always, no matter what language you choose to use, there will always be somebody who is upset by it for some reason. You will never make everyone happy all of the time with the language that you're using. Being that we work kind of, with one foot in the queer community and one foot in the law enforcement and forensics community.
Sam found it.
Oh, good. Thank you, Sam. They're very, the language in which you were talking about victims might be really different. So we kind of have like a hodgepodge of the way that we talk about victims, because we're talking to two audiences. And we know that some of the language that we use is a little bit rough around the edges, in terms of what's currently considered the most sensitive. But we're also talking about very old reports of very old cases sometimes. So you can't just completely, switch the way that law enforcement discusses old cases either.
Yeah. For example, if you want to talk about the high-risk lifestyle issue, we're trying to make the switch to using sex worker instead of prostitute, but you kind of have to use both depending on who you're talking about. And it's kind of hard to switch back and do that code switching thing that we talked about earlier and switch back and forth with that language. Like, you have to find the intersectional point, and we're trying to make that more we're trying to make that a little better understood for the people who need to understand it, but we're also trying to be forgiving of people who haven't caught up with the current language, because we know it changes so fast.
It changes faster than we even can keep up with it sometimes.
Yeah. We're old by trans standards, and we still use things that people think might be offensive, and we never thought they were.
So, well, I'm 41 and 39. And, when we were 25, what people were using for self-identification, in their profiles is now considered a slur.
Yeah.
So it changes really, really fast.
It's really strange how fast it changes. I mean, maybe that was a long time ago by regular people's standards, but
I don't feel that old.
I don't think I'm that old, Okay. Is there a specific time or person where sex-affirming surgery was first performed? How early were these surgeries available? The earliest gender-affirming surgeries that I've been able to trace are Magnus Hirschfeld's clinic in Berlin. And I don't have an exact date on when the first one was. I believe it was 1931, but I may be incorrect. You should look at his website and find out, but I know that he pioneered the field. One thing that I didn't mention, I actually should have mentioned this during the presentation. So the term that predates transsexualism that Hirschfeld and Harry Benjamin standardized was actually Aeonism based on Chevalier d'Aeon. And that was coined by a Dr. Havelock Ellis from the 1910s. So
he's a really interesting guy.
Oh yeah, he's actually asexual and a clinical psychologist. So he's interesting to take a look at. He's like, wow, sex is interesting. I don't want any.
I'm going to study it for my whole life and not have it at all.
So he's really fascinating and a really early example of the study of clinical sexology. And he was one of the first people to actually make a modern term that is now very archaic, but I think it's actually still pretty neat. So you should take a look at that. But yeah, to answer your question, I believe the first surgeries were early 1930s. Are there industry standard tools and methods for forensic genealogy? If so, where would I find that information? Where you would find that information would be from me.
Well, okay, the Department of Justice has proposed standards and guidelines for the implementation of forensic genetic genealogy in law enforcement context. But they're not requirements, they're suggested standards. They haven't been formally made mandatory yet. And there isn't an overseeing body doing any certification, standardization type of thing. It's dependent on the department, how they're handling their own cases, and to make sure that whoever they're bringing in that might be from the outside is up to their department standards. So what we're doing in our training course is trying to prepare people to meet those standards and to work under the DOJ guidelines.
Yeah. And also hopefully helping to contribute to the conversation of what the actual standards should be when they're finalized.
And that's what your dissertation
That's what my dissertation is about. So currently the forensic genealogy training for law enforcement, fgforelli.com is a good place to go look. I'm not only saying that because I made it, but also because I'm trying to make it as comprehensive as possible. Take a look at that and take a look at some of the offerings and see if it jives with you. I'm currently trying to find a place to fit in a university level certification program, and hopefully that will be happening soon. And hopefully I'll be able to make an announcement. Because if I could get in at a university level, that would automatically make the entire thing more credible and more standardized and really help a lot of agencies know where to look for people who know what they're doing. So does the Transdo Task Force work on cases outside of the United States as well? Yes, we do and we will. So we have a number of cases on our list that are worldwide. We have a number in England. We have a number in Canada. There are a few cases in Canada that we're actually hoping to be able to work on because for some reason Canadians like us a lot.
Well, you've trained a lot of RCMP.
I have trained a lot of the RCMP, so there is that. And so there's a number of cases outside of the United States that we would be able to work on. The problem with working on forensic genetic genealogy cases outside of the US is the GPDR compliance, which is that lovely thing that makes it so that you can't do all the same cool stuff that you could do on the internet that you could before, including finding records of living people. That makes our job a little bit harder.
It's much easier for us to work on US cases from within the US. That's the easiest.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's impossible for us to do Canadian cases. We solved a Canadian case last year.
Yeah. If we're working on an international case, it's always better for us to work with the agency so they can do law enforcement lookups for us. We like to do that anyway because we want to have as good communication with the agency as possible. Whatever involvement they want to have with us, we want it. But when we're working on an international case, it absolutely is essential to have that communication so they can help us do lookups. Can law enforcement ask to see the list of missing persons that you guys have compiled, the one that you have says protected? Yes, if you go to lamp.transdotaskforce.org, LAMMP, you will be able to apply for law enforcement access to our backend website and actually run comparisons yourself or ask us to look them up.
Well, actually, it's investigator access because it's not just law enforcement. We count it if you are researching a case as an investigator in a different capacity. If you have an adjacent field that you're working in, that's fine too. As long as you're working on investigations.
Yeah. So yes, you can absolutely email us for access and we will give you instructions on how to get to it. And we would love to see more investigators getting involved in wanting to use it. And we would also love to improve our system and make it even more functional. So how much more time do we have?
Quite a bit.
Quite a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are there more questions coming up inside of here that we're not seeing?
Because I haven't been looking. A lot of nice supportive messages, which is really cool. And I'm actually going to save this chat because some of these people sound really awesome. But if anybody has anything else they want to submit, that would be really great. It's a lot of people saying that Sean Tallman is cool, so we like that.
Well, that's true.
Okay, yeah. So can Ellie call about a case and pick your brain? Absolutely. Please call us. Please email us. Do whatever you can to get a hold of us. We want you to do that. Our brains are right here for you.
Yes, very much. And same with anybody who's like an anthropologist,
medical investigator,
coroners.
If you're doing historical research, you can do that too. We love historical research. Like any question you have, just email us. Just do it.
Yep.
And we'll send you our phone number or send you a Zoom link and be more than happy to talk about it.
Jesse said, by the way, and sent the screenshot.
Okay. So Jesse found the stats for the... Okay, so there were 63 medical-related deaths in Pakistan in the past year and 85 in India. Some of those are going to be related to COVID. You'd have to look in the case details specifically to get that because it'll be in the system. You'll have to search for it, but some of those will be COVID-related or other lack of medical care or accidents. Do we have any other questions? Or
if there's any other questions that somebody had saved from before, you can type them in and we can see them.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, like if our moderators on YouTube and Facebook are getting anything, you can put those in the Q&A box as well.
I don't think there's anything going on Facebook, so we're not streaming to Facebook.
Yeah, we're just streaming to the YouTube. So
can I just say that I love that this is the screen that's up on the...
I know, I love this screen. This is my favorite screen. By the way...
This artist is awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, Sam was saying something. What were you saying, Sam?
I don't see any questions, so I just wanted to let you know if you wanted to go on break, you could just let me know.
Okay, I think we might go on an early break
we'll go a little early.
Get some lunch. I just want to tell you about this slide since we've been looking at this lovely rainbow of genitalia for a while. This artist is really cool. You just go to her website. I actually don't know if this is a cisgender female person or if they have different pronouns now, so I'm just going to say they hand sculpt different representations of human anatomy in fun colors to teach people about the differences in human anatomy and how there's not just one way to represent human genitalia. Some of these, you can't tell if that's male or female genitalia because it's not actually either. It's somewhere in the middle. This is the fleshy parts. This isn't even in the skeleton. This is what the outside parts do that's so different and cool. And definitely look at their website and learn more. And if you are an educator in health or forensics, you can actually buy some of their models. Yes, yes, this lecture is up on the TDTF website for,
It will be, yeah.
This copy of this will be up. There's also a previous recording of this from one time that I gave it
Oh, yeah.
in one of Amy's classes. And she says that it's mandatory viewing for all anthro students, which I approve of that. Yeah.
Couldn't get the PDF.
Couldn't get the PDFs loaded. It is very large.
It is very large. It could be a whole book.
Yeah, it could be. An alternate I could do is actually provide the Google link as read only, and people could copy it, and that might be easier.
Okay.
I'll do that, and I'll update the link to have that as an alternate link during the break after I get some food. So if nobody else has any questions, I think we're gonna take a break now, do a little bit of regrouping, and be back for session 3 with Jesse at whatever time that is. What time is that at?
Well, at my time, it's 12:35.
12:35 Mountain Time.
Standard Time, yeah.
All right, so we got about maybe a half an hour, maybe 20 minutes. I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Not good at time conversion. Yeah, we're gonna go on break. Okay, we'll talk soon.
We'll be back later.
Yep. All right, see you then.
Thank you.